Hi, this is Maker's Ask, and I'm Blue Reid. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about drawing and how to be your most successful at it, and then I'm going to do a little demo, and I'll speed it up, but at least you can kind of get a feel for what the process is. So when I start to sit down to do a drawing, and I'm talking about representational drawing, but anything, you can apply anything to it, but if you're talking about representing something really accurately, then I want to have that thing in front of me. In this case, I'm going to do this model of the human heart. Don't want to have a real heart out here because that's gross. But a model does just fine, or you can use a picture or something that is a reference. If you're doing flowers, have the flower in front of you because that's where your information comes from. So it's great to draw from your imagination, but you will do so a lot better if you familiarize yourself with the real thing that's been in front of you a lot, namely people. If you've drawn a lot of people, then you can start to draw from your rich imagination because you've filled that imagination with real things that you can then spring off of. Does that make sense? Okay. So let's say, well, we're not really pretending it's the real thing. I sit down to draw. The first thing I want to do is to sort of set the tone. So I make sure I have all my tools out. I've got my thing I'm going to draw. I've got the paper I want to use. Everything is out for me. I've set aside this time to do this, and I know that, relatively speaking, I'm not going to be interrupted. That said, I'm a huge believer in drawing every day, if you can. So I spend a lot of time waiting for people. Do you do that? So what I do is I have a very small little sketchbook. This is a great one. It's a real big one, right? But I don't carry this sucker around all the time, but it's always at the ready on my headboard or whatever. But my small one I carry everywhere with a little pencil pouch like a kid with a few colored pencils and a couple of my supplies so that I can draw because it entertains me and it hones my skills. And that said, I also keep a little file of some photographs because I'm often wanting to hone my skills of drawing accurately. That helps me improve my skill set. So that's a little bit about that. All right, so then I sit down and I take a few seconds to take a few deep breaths and so that my space is ready, but then I'm really ready. I'm entering this space of now I'm going to draw. So the first thing I do is a few deep breaths, just in and out, and just ground myself, tell myself I'm here to draw, this is what I'm doing. I set my eyes upon the thing I'm going to draw, and I just stare at it. I'll tell you a little anecdote. You want to cut away for an anecdote? That's so fun. I was once asked out on a date when I was about 17 by this like 25-year-old fry cook with a huge mohawk. And I thought that was fantastic. And my mother thought otherwise. She thought that was a terrible idea. And I said, it's just one date. And what she said, I apply it to everything because I always do that. She said, what you spend your time with, you fall in love with. And I was like, I can't fall in love with him. I'm just going to go out with him. Anyway, I went out with him. Against her better judgment. It was terrible, but so I didn't repeat that. However, I love that saying, what you spend your time with, you fall in love with. And you tend to do that, if you'll notice. So I've had a lot of people in classes I've taught about drawing sit there and if they'll spend a few seconds, minute even, staring at the item, and then I come back and I say, what did you feel? What were some of the emotions? It's amazing how many people will go and say, I think it was love, which is, I mean, what? But it's sort of like that. You start to see yourself in an object or whatever. It becomes relatable. So to me, drawing is a way to understand things. So when I begin, I sit down and I stare at it. And I don't begin to draw until I feel that impulse to draw. And that may take no time or it may take a little bit of a time, but there's always that, you can get really sensitive to it too, but I will stare and stare and stare, and if you just allow your eyes to move freely and be the observer of what your eyes are doing, you will notice something really amazing start to happen. And what it is your eye is starting to map it. And what you want to do is start to be able to connect what your eyes and your mind are doing with what your hand can do. That's really what drawing is to me. This is what they call learning to see. It's really about that connection. How do I draw what my mind is doing? Translate that. So I will always notice my mind going and it's making these interesting connections. Oh, this goes up here and then it swings up there and it comes down there and then it goes up here and it becomes very exciting. At that point I feel the impulse to draw and then I do. Now I don't start with the tiny little veins. Or if I'm doing a portrait, I don't start with the eyelashes. I use that phrase a lot. Don't start with the eyelashes, which means don't do detail first. You might do a beautiful eye in your portrait, but it then won't relate to anything else. So don't do that. I like to say draw the blob into which you think this thing will eventually fit. So big mess. Don't be afraid to make a mess. That's what erasers were created for. So make a big mess. Work from very, very general and then go more and more and more specific. And before you know it, you'll begin doing the tiny little details. But if you begin with those, forget it. You'll judge it to be a lousy drawing in the end, most likely. Okay. Then there's this fancy little thing called the 80-20 split. You know what that is? If I ask that question, people guess it right. They say, well, it's how much time you spend looking at the thing you're drawing versus how much time you spend looking at your drawing itself. Correct. Which is which? And this is the part they get wrong. They say, well, obviously 20% looking, 80% drawing. No. I know, incredible, huh? 80% staring and watching what your eyes do, 20% checking your drawing. That doesn't mean your hand can't be drawing, but it does mean that you need to keep staring at that because that's where your information's coming from. If you stop looking at the source then disappears from view. So, and then you're drawing from your imagination. And I'm not saying don't do that, but for this purpose, drawing what's in front of you, eyes on the object, is a great, great practice. So, that will start to, you'll start wanting to stop drawing when you're not looking once you get to the detail part, clearly. But don't stop staring at what you're drawing. Okay, then as you go, as things start to get sort of gelled together, it's okay to turn on that critical side of your brain. I like to call the ego or your left brain because it's a great tool. It's very negative all the time, right? It's always telling you what's wrong with stuff. But it's useful. It's not useful when it's like, you're lame and you'd stop, you know, whatever. That's not useful. But what is that doesn't look right. That's too big over there. And what about this thing? It doesn't have 4 veins, it has 3. This is useful information. So use that information. Make sure it's about the object and not personal. Not you're wrong, but the drawing is wrong. Okay, last thing you do, you've looked it over, it looks fantastic, you're really pleased with your efforts, sign it. Always sign your work. Bottom right corner, and don't do it in red, and don't do it huge. That annoys me, because which one is, you're hoping that your work is really powerful, and that it sells itself, not necessarily your name. We know that as a person gains fame, that your name starts to mean more than the work, but let's all band together and stop doing that, because it's important that the work remain the important part. Okay? Okay, and here goes the demo. I'm going to show you how this is done, so I'll zoom in a little bit, okay? Oh, something important. When I'm drawing like this, I don't hold the pencil this way because this is for detail work. This is for the veins and eyelashes, so to speak. But so when I'm drawing generally, here's the pencil, I grab it from the top. This means I'm really moving my arms at this point, okay? Okay, I thought of something else. It's a good thing to not talk because that's a left brain process and you want to stay in your right brain. And it's a good thing if you have music on and you like music, which I do often, that it's better if it doesn't have lyrics, or it's better if you know the lyrics maybe so well that your brain isn't engaging in the story of the music. And often that happens, so if you can avoid that, that's a good thing to do too. Okay, back to work. And by the way, this is one of your tools. This is just graphite. This is has no wood, a woodless graphite, which I really like. That's my one tool. Second tool, an eraser. It's a tool, not just for mistakes, but you can do all kinds of good drawing things. Third tool, my hands. So you have 3 tools, at least. Another thing, I like to make what I would call beautiful marks. So I'm careful and conscious about how I'm using this. This beautiful little stick of graphite, I can use it as on its sharp end to make a very tiny mark, or I can use it as you've seen me doing on the side. But I can also make a beautiful mark by going from one side all the way up onto the tip and make a very beautiful mark. And this is a very nice mark maker as well, to make the drawing more interesting. This is why you draw. One other concept that I like people to sort of play with is, if you're having a really good time doing it, you might be smiling. And if you're not having a really good time, try smiling and see what happens. I love to draw, and I will often catch myself, even in deep concentration, smiling because it's fun. And if it's not fun, we're in charge. We get to decide whether or not we do things that are fun or not do things that are fun. But if you already know you love art, then this can be fun. So smile. Something else to consider is a controlled lighting of whatever it is you're drawing. So I'm out here in the sunshine, so it's changing a little bit. That's suboptimal, especially if it's taking more than an hour. Another thing I do is, as I'm drawing cylinders, I don't just draw the front of the ellipse. I tend to, especially in the beginning phases of the drawing, I draw the whole ellipse, even if I even draw the invisible parts, because it helps me to construct it. So I like to see a lot of construction lines in people's work, a lot of lines here and there and all over the place, making a big mess, but not carving it in, just whispering on the paper, because you'll want to get rid of them later, but they're essential for the construction so that your things fit. You know, some of this is going to go off the page, but they're small things. The bulk of the drawing is going to be, you know, wherever it is I want it. And in this case, it's pretty centrally located, so that your emphasis is really these beautiful veins and the muscle structure here and what's going on up here. Okay? Another thing to consider is that my point of view is going to change. If I sit back, if I lean forward, I have to stay at a pretty consistent place so that my eyes don't, so that my point of view stays the same. Even if I am over here, it's going to be a totally different vantage point. So keep that in mind. You got to keep yourself in approximately the same place. If you see something going wrong in your drawing, I call it fearless correction. Don't be worried. If you did something beautiful once, but it's in the wrong spot, it's just wrong. So don't be nervous. If you did it beautiful once, you can do it beautiful in the right spot too. So fearlessly erase, okay? So you can get it just right. Maybe nobody would notice, but it may affect other parts of the drawing. So don't give yourself the excuse, it doesn't really matter. If you're really striking out for perfection, you might as well go for it. Not because the end product maybe, but because you're going to hone your skills a whole lot better if you hold yourself to a nice high standard. So don't be afraid to raise your bar, but don't beat yourself up about it either. Something else is funny. People always tell me, you're so lucky that you can draw. And it always amuses me because, do you say that to a swimmer? You're so lucky you can swim really fast. It's pretty funny, isn't it? I'm not good at drawing because I'm really lucky. I'm good at drawing because I do this all the freaking time. You can get good at it. It just takes a lot of practice. And in drawing, it's not necessary to say the whole story. It's okay to be super tight in some areas and really loose in others. That's a style choice. If you want to noodle out the entire thing, that's great. If you want to leave some parts sort of with a lost or a found edge, that can be a very beautiful effect. So don't be afraid to do that. can see my sunlight is changing things. Oh well, we punt, right? Onward. So as I'm going, I'm thinking about what the local color is versus the highlighted shadow, because the way I turn that form is the darks and the lights. So it's got to have enough contrast to really turn the form, and yet these things are darker, you know, intrinsically than this part. So I want to make sure that even not the lightest lights, but the midtones are darker so that it reads correctly. Something else is, if you're working for photography or something and you don't understand what part of that photograph is, you won't be able to convince your viewer to know what it is, because you have to truly understand something in order to explain it to somebody else, right? Just like anything else. It's the same with art. So I much prefer having the actual thing in front of me, or at least shooting my own photography, which I do all the time, because that way, if the photograph isn't clear and I don't know what's going on, I can just, you know, look at it that way and then say, oh, it's the other, you know, it's the backside or whatever. It makes a huge difference. So when you use photography for your work, we call that scrap. So make sure your scrap is excellent, or shoot it yourself and keep a model around, okay? I like to use erasers to create a lot of texture. So you can certainly make beautiful marks with your pencil, but you can also make beautiful marks with your erasers. So I like to have this little one for small detail work, but it'll work well to make texture here. In this part with the where the muscle is high and low and striped. I actually want this heart to feel like it's in movement, so it's actually still beating in a way. So I'm going to leave it a little messy on the sides, leave it a little bit of the edges, sort of what they call lost and found, because it'll give it the impression of more movement, which is interesting to me. So that part is creative. It's clearly not in this model, but it works for the drawing better. Okay, I think it's done. Want to see? Okay, this is going to be part of the giveaway on Instagram. So if you like this, I'm going to sign it. And we're going to pick a lucky winner. So good luck. This has been Makers Ask, and I'm Blue Reid, and you can look for me on Instagram.